Good morning and welcome to Inquirer Live. I'm Trudy Rubin, Worldview columnist for the Philadelphia Inquirer. Many Americans are unaware of the heavy cost to Afghans of the final U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan, scheduled to be over by 9/11, but likely by mid-July. Many Afghans fear a Taliban takeover or civil war. We will be discussing today two categories of Afghans who are especially vulnerable and whom Americans should have a strong interest in. The thousands of Afghan translators who are under death threat from the Taliban because they helped the US military. Congress promised them visas, which aren't being delivered. And Afghan girls and women who have made huge progress after 20 years of greater freedoms and could lose it all if the Taliban returns. Today's format will be different from previous events. In the first segment, I'll be discussing the plight of the 18,000 or so former translators for our military. There's bipartisan support for them in Congress, veterans groups, but the visas are not coming. I'll be speaking to Ambassador Ryan Crocker, the former U.S. ambassador to Afghanistan, as well as Iraq, Pakistan, and other Mideast posts. Ambassador Crocker was a major force behind congressional approval in 2008 of a program to grant so-called special immigrant visas, known as SIVs, to Afghans and Iraqis who helped our military. Also part of the discussion will be James Miervaldis, a military veteran and board chairman of No One Left Behind, a volunteer organization that lobbies to expedite SIV visas for translators and to help those who arrive here. In the second segment, I'll be talking with three courageous young Afghan women. They are trying to plan a future in which a Taliban return or civil war could mean the end of women's work and education and condemn girls and women to staying at home and being unable to study and work. After these two segments, we'll open up to questions from the audience for any of the five speakers. At any time during the discussion, you can submit questions by typing them into the comment section at the bottom of this page. If you're watching us on social platforms, please go to inquirer.com/Trudy Rubin Live and submit your questions. At the end of the event, you'll see a page listing organizations dedicating to helping Afghan translators and women. The list will also be visible below the screen during the discussion. So now I want to turn to Ambassador Crocker and James Miervaldis to talk about the life and death issue of getting visas to Afghan translators. And could we please join in with Ambassador Crocker and James Miervaldis? Thanks to both of you for being here. Ambassador Crocker, as we both recall, I've had the privilege of knowing Ambassador Crocker for about 40 years, so we recall a lot of things. As we both recall, you were the mover behind the original SIV visa program for Afghan and Iraqi translators. Can you explain why this visa program is so important and why it's so urgent to help those Afghans who helped our military?
First, Trudy, thanks very much for having us here and for focusing some national attention on a critical issue. This started for me when I was named ambassador to Iraq. I arrived there in the early spring of 2007. And just a few weeks after I got there, one of our locally engaged staff of Foreign Service National, an Iraqi individual who was working for the embassy, was kidnapped. And a ransom demand appeared instructing that his wife, also an embassy employee, bring a certain amount of money to a certain location and to come alone. We supported, she wanted to do it, and we offered her all the support we could with a diplomatic security follow car as she went to the destination. They lost her in heavy traffic, and a few days later, both of their bodies were found. Just a horrific, cold murder. And that got me going on what can we do to be sure that Iraqis who support us don't have to pay the ultimate price themselves. So I had reference to the Special Immigrant Visa Program. It's been around a long time. It is was a very small scale operation designed really to allow long-time foreign employees of American embassies globally the opportunity to come to the States under a special immigrant visa. I had done that in Beirut. It was onesies and twosies. It was never meant for massive movements. But in 2007, that was the vehicle available, and we got it up and running. I was proud to see the first SIVs issued by late 2008. And the rest, as they say, is history. It's a platform that, again, was never designed for mass movements. I thought at the time that we would get a special program underway, with legislative efforts and fixes and counterfixes and so forth. It's still the SIV program, and it is really the only way that these people whose lives are now on the line in Afghanistan for supporting us, the only way they can get out.
James, why is this so important to get it moving? I mean, what do we owe these interpreters? And what would be the consequence if we leave them behind in Afghanistan and hundreds, thousands of them are killed? I'm afraid your sound is off.
There we go. Thank you very much, Trudy, and thank you to the Inquirer for continuing to raise awareness about our interpreters. Just for some context, not including the Iraq SIV program that the ambassador stood up, this Afghan SIV program has now spanned 3 administrations, 7 Congresses, 5 Secretaries of State, and 7 Secretaries of Defense. In 2008, the state OIG audited the Iraqi SIV program. 13 years later, the state OIG audited the Afghan SIV program. And many of the discoveries in 2008 were never acted upon. So the State Department OIG pretty much said, wow, we just lost more than a decade. It's very frustrating. So to answer your question, it would be a national stain. On a personal level, as a veteran in the Army who served in Iraq and Afghanistan, I equate mission accomplished with bringing an interpreter here. We had the opportunity to welcome an Afghan family at Dulles Airport earlier this week. It was a great feeling. You felt that you made it. We as a country made a very positive impact in that person's life. They now are safe. But it also hurts knowing that there are tens of thousands still left behind. The national security implication of this is very profound. We're going to need interpreters well into the future, and in many different theaters as well. So who's going to join with the United States if they know we don't keep our promise? On the other hand of this, the our enemies, the Taliban, are starting to kill interpreters specifically as propaganda tool or messaging. They want to take pictures and videos of intimidation. They know that the United States, through its own efforts and lack of attention to the the SIV program, has already created a displaced persons program. We've already had applicants reach out to us from 30 different countries who fled out of fear. They paid human smugglers to get to Turkey and are living in the refugee camps. Some made it to Europe. So
these are translators who fled, right?
Correct. The translators and their families who fled because they were tired of waiting for this process.
Can you explain briefly, why does it take so long it can take 3 to 5 years. I know I went through this with my translator from Iraq, and his brother, who was entitled to an SIV, his brothers, one was killed, and one is still waiting 5 years later. So, and they all had death threats over years. So, what is the hangup?
Sure. Very simply for your viewers, it's a 14-step process. It's there are about 3 agencies at least involved in this. It's a State Department run managed program. The Department of Defense really has no legal authority in it. And that's very important because there is no single database that confirms through biometrics or employment verification who worked for which units, which contractors, whether they provided 2 years of honorable service, which is the legal wording for the SIV. So what happens is it's on the interpreter to provide the burden of proof and to meet that threshold. Many of these people have to go search on Facebook and LinkedIn 5 years later to find Joe Smith, who worked with them. We get emails to No One Left Behind asking, can you please find Joe Smith in the Army? No other details than that. And it's very, very difficult. Additionally, DoD contractors have not shared their employment verification with these individuals. Specifically, we get about a dozen requests for mission essential personnel, which is based out of Columbus, Ohio, asking for their HR team just to send letters saying these employees, these SIV applicants were employees. You can't move forward in the process without those.
So, in other words, the bureaucratic process is almost impenetrable for these. And in the meantime, am I correct? About 300 Afghan translators have already been killed.
Yes, ma'am. In April of last year, we finished our research into 6 years of emails and the last year of Facebook messages. We documented over 300 instances of interpreters and their family members being killed for being affiliated with the United States. And again, that's just in Afghanistan. As a corollary, another group, the Red T, which is based out of Europe, wrote a letter to Pope Francis a few years ago, citing at that time 500 interpreters in Iraq and 500 interpreters in Afghanistan had already been killed. We'll never know the real numbers. It's very, very sad.
So, Ambassador Crocker, we're dealing with a narrow time window, correct? You advocated keeping a small troop presence in Afghanistan. That is not happening. So firstly, do you think that small presence could have prevented a civil war or Taliban takeover? And secondly, how much time do you think we have before it will be impossible for these translators to get visas in place in Kabul?
Well, that's the critical question, Trudy, and the very sad answer is we don't know. We had agency in Afghanistan with our troop presence. It had gone down from its heights when I was ambassador in 2011, 2012 to Afghanistan, just about 100,000 troops, down to maybe 3. The important thing about that number is even with a over 90% reduction of our forces, the Taliban were not able to make us gain ground. They knew we were there. They knew that entailed a presidential commitment. When you have deployed forces, it is a White House issue. But they've managed to aid us. And we don't know what's going to happen next because it's the Taliban who has agency, not us. And I just wanted to add one thing to James and the very important data he provided. It's also a question of resources. And James has been arguing for years now, put more resources into it. Process the paper faster. We had that ability. Successive administrations and successive Congresses really kind of declined to do that. So now, as the clock ticks to midnight, the Biden administration did surge, if you will, 50 additional personnel into the embassy in Kabul to speed up the processing, where they ran right into the required a shutdown of all embassy operations. It's something that was foreseeable. COVID's been in the country almost since the pandemic started. But this last minute effort to say, we got to do something, reflects the lack of support, focus, and interest on the part not only of this administration.
There's a little trouble with the audio, so let me continue this important point with James. There is a shortage of personnel, as we've heard, but is the heart of the problem twofold? One, that this program rests only in the State Department, and there aren't enough people. The Defense Department has no involvement here. And secondly, well, you tell us, why is the White House not willing, do you think, to expedite this, to get the Defense Department involved, and maybe to organize an airlift, which is what we did in Vietnam when we airlifted 110,000 people out before that famous helicopter on the roof? So why aren't we handling it that way?
Sure. So Trudy, it's very frustrating. So for your viewers, we have unprecedented bipartisan support in both the House and the Senate. So I wanted to specifically point to Senator Jeanne Shaheen, who's been leading on this issue with the deceased Senator McCain since day one. And Senator Shaheen has picked up the torch and run with it. She's been an incredible advocate. Ranking Member McCall on the House Foreign Affairs Committee is standing by. He's asking the White House to give me a plan. We're ready to work and we're ready to fund it. The Honoring Our Promises working group is about 20 members in the House, many of them veterans like Representative Crow, Representative Mike Waltz. Representative Mike Waltz is the first Green Beret elected to Congress who had an interpreter who beheaded while waiting for his special immigrant visa. So this is very, very personal to the veterans on Capitol Hill. We have unprecedented VSO support. No One Left Behind has helped pull together over 4 years many of the top veteran service organizations representing 5 million veterans. And Trudy, we have a TV show on CBS. It's called The United States of Al. It's a comedy. It's made by Chuck Lorre and the writing team from The Big Bang Theory. And it just got picked up for a second season because it was good. So my point is you've got about 5 million viewers there who are now learning about this issue for the first time. And the Department of Defense has said a couple things. Chairman Milley has said this is a moral imperative and that he's ready to start working on a plan. General McKenzie from CENTCOM said he's working on it right now and they'll do what they need to do. They're waiting on the White House. Regarding your question about an evacuation, we're keeping a very close eye on what the military calls the retrograde. That's the official withdrawal. As of last week, they announced they were over 50%. I have no inside knowledge on this, but maybe I'm conjecturing there's maybe 1,000 troops left in theater. And there was another article in, I believe, The Hill that cited that we were turning over our major airbase, Bagram Airbase, to the Afghans probably at the end of June. So you can't have an evacuation if you don't have a runway. And if you don't have a runway, you don't have airplanes, then it's not going to happen. That seems to be a very senior level decision. I think that I know the White House is very bullish on the Afghan National Security Forces. We are hoping that the Department of Defense can augment Secretary Blinken's work. And Trudy, to give your viewers a quick throwback 9 years ago, you had a wonderful conversation with then Deputy National Security Advisor Tony Blinken, who's now the Secretary of State, about SIVs. And we just appreciate his concern, but that was 9 years ago.
But it's not happening. So just to sum up, you have a situation where right now the U.S. Embassy in Kabul is shut because of COVID. So no visas are being issued.
None.
you have no special focus, a special pathway that is organized from the top to expedite SIV visas through different agencies. None, right? Excuse me. You and DOD, the Defense Department, can't gin up an airlift without the command from the White House, from the commander-in-chief, right?
Correct.
So despite bipartisan support, those translators are stuck, right? Ambassador Crocker, why do you think the White House won't act? Well, let me switch that question to you, James. What's the hangup?
Let's, again, going back to history. The previous administration was aware of this issue in a very odd data point that many of your viewers will find surprising. The Trump administration actually brought in more Afghan interpreters and refugees than in the 8 years of the previous administration through the SIV program. But they didn't solve the problem. And they also did not have anyone in charge of it. For your viewers, the actual senior coordinating official, so the one person in charge, is the Undersecretary of State for Management. And Secretary Pompeo didn't announce that billet until March of 2020. So it's a very frustrating situation. I think they want to show support to the Afghan security forces. We know we've heard mixed things from Kabul that the Taliban's public statement about two SIV applicants last week.
Excuse me, let me just interrupt because we're going to be switching in a moment to the young women. Is there any chance for an airlift now, do you believe?
It's too late.
Could the hold on the Bagram Air Base be delayed? And if U.S. troops, some of them were delayed in leaving, could an airlift still be organized?
Possibly.
And
so that's
then,
from the White House.
And then if airlifted, the SIV holders would have to go to a third country a third territory such as Guam, right, to be processed fully.
Possibly. Secretary Blinken said in his testimony in front of the House that he's had conversations with third countries. So maybe a Middle Eastern country. We have American bases in Kuwait, in Qatar, and the UAE.
But we are talking 18,000 translators, right? And their immediate family members. So if there's going to be movement, it has to be immediately, correct?
Should be. Mm-hmm. That's about 70,000 individuals.
And if they are not moved, you are expecting more to die.
Correct.
And just to wrap up, could you just give an example of briefly of an SIV case that you know of where the worst happened because they couldn't get here?
We actually got a few last night. So the SIV applicants reach out to us via our email and through our Facebook page. They're citing relatives outside of Kabul, namely in Kandahar. So the United States has already pulled out of the South, and most of the reports we're getting are from attacks in Kandahar. So with an absence of U.S. troops, there was a picture of a gentleman blindfolded, shot, and stuffed in a car.
All right. So we see what will happen if there isn't movement. We will continue this during the question period. And I would now like to welcome our Afghan women participants, all of them very courageous and graduates of or about to graduate from U.S. universities. We are going to be talking with Samin Royesh, a Smith College graduate who will join us from Kabul. She returned after graduation. She is now a teacher working on designing the first Afghan school program for distance learning. Then, hello, Samin, wonderful to see you. Then we will be speaking with...
Hi, Trudy.
Hi. We'll be speaking with Hanifa Darwish, a rising senior at Trinity College in Connecticut, who has taught and built a library in a rural girls' school outside Kabul that is now under threat by the Taliban. Hanifa, nice to see you. And finally, last but not least, Kamarnisa Ayub, a Wagner College graduate who spent her childhood as a refugee in Pakistan, yet is now a student research assistant at Beth Israel Deaconess Hospital, pursuing her dream of working as a doctor in Afghanistan. But her Kabul high school was recently bombed, killing 90 girl students, a chilling warning about the future. These young young women who overcame huge obstacles to get their education are examples of how life has changed for the better in the last 20 years for girls and women in Afghanistan, something that U.S. officials have bragged about, but may come to a terrible halt. So, Samin, let me start with you. How was your experience different from your mother's? How does that illustrate how far girls and women have come and how much is at risk?
Thank you, Trudy, for having us in this conversation. I think it's a really meaningful conversation to have at this moment. Actually, there has been a lot of differences between the experience of my mom in Afghanistan versus mine. I was thinking about it recently. I came to realize that my mom got married when she was 16. But when I was 16, for the first time, I went to the US for a summer program. My mom gave birth to my sister when she was 17. But when I was 17, I started applying for colleges in the US. Other than that, my mom hasn't had any formal education, and she doesn't have a job right now. Right now she's just attending, like accelerator programs for adults. She's trying to go to school and learn something, but she cannot find any job for herself because she hasn't had any education, and her connections are only limited to her immediate family members and the relatives that we have known or we have had in Afghanistan. But that's not the case for me, because I have been in the US. I have been traveling to other countries too. I have been meeting people from different backgrounds, and right now I feel like I have more connection than her. So I think, just like looking back at the two generation, I think there has been a lot of changes that especially like my generation has experienced in the past 20 years in Afghanistan.
So you came back to Kabul. What is the situation now in Kabul? And what does it look like for girls' futures and women?
I think the situation right now in Kabul, it's a tough situation for everyone, specifically for women and girls, because of the uncertainty that's awaiting us. We are not sure what's going to happen once the US troops leave by September, because we haven't had any clear explanations or updates about the ongoing talks between the Taliban groups and our government on the peace process. So I think everyone is just worried about what's going to happen, as you explained at the beginning of your interview. So everyone is either anticipating that the Taliban would take over, or there would be a civil war in the country. So that's why people who have the opportunity, who have the resources, and who have the connections, they are trying to find an alternative option for themselves. For example, I know so many people who are applying for their national ID card, for their passport, just in case something happens, they can easily get out of Afghanistan. In the meantime, there are also other people who are like worried about their lives, because it's it's clear and it's like obvious that because the Taliban want to have a more leverage over the government in order to make them to accept their terms and conditions, so the amount of insecurity will increase in Afghanistan, and they will just increase their attacks on different parts of Afghanistan, specifically in Kabul. So I think like everyone is worried, but some people, like, they have no options, like they have to just keep going with their daily life. And I think this is like the cycle that as Afghans have been experiencing like for like most of our lives, I would say. And definitely because of the ideologies that the Taliban have shown from themselves in the time being that they were in Afghanistan, I think the situation will definitely get harder for Afghan women and girls. Specifically, I'm worried regarding their job opportunities and also their education.
Right. Now, Hanifa, you did a gap year before coming to the United States, as I understand, and you taught in a rural area and opened a library for girls. Can you tell us a little about that experience? Were those girls eager to learn? And what is happening now with those girls, given the advances of the Taliban?
Sure. So when I graduated high school in 2016, besides running a library that my sister had established, I was fortunate to work with RAWA, which stands for Revolutionary Women of Afghanistan, in one of their clinics in a distant area of Kabul, which was predominantly Pashtun neighborhood. And there were rumors that there's lots of Taliban members living in that area. And my family always told me that it was very dangerous for me to even go there. But after my first visit at the only primary school, I decided to go. And soon after that, with the help of the doctors in the clinic, I was able to put together a small library-like room for girls to come to the clinic for an hour every 2 days in a week to learn English language and to also read and discuss books. I had managed to teach them as well as to have a book club with them. All the girls in that area, even then, had to cover their faces and they were not allowed to go to school after grade 6. I managed to work with them for over a year. But after I came here for school, no one replaced me because of the dangers it had.
Wow. I want to talk to that more, but let me just turn to Kamarnisa. And I know, Kamarnisa, you weren't actually you weren't a refugee, so I correct myself on that. But tell me, how did your parents encourage your education? What were their dreams for you?
Thank you for having us. So my parents, they come from Hazara ethnic group in Afghanistan. And for them, education was the only way and approach to access resource, to build a better future. So for us, as a deprived ethnicity, it has become more apparent now recently, which I grew up with little awareness about just the ethnicities and how one is just discriminated. But so for my parents, it was a way for them to fulfill their dreams through me. And my dad always told me that, oh, one day you're going to become a doctor and help women, help everyone in Afghanistan. And his big dream was for me to become the Minister of Public Health in Afghanistan.
It's wonderful, I think, for Americans to know that many fathers in Afghanistan encouraged their daughters. It is not that, wise Afghan men don't want education for their girls. It's that they want them to have the chance for education. But let me ask you about a sad thing. You graduated from a school named Syed al-Shahada, and you built a library at that school. And recently, bombs were put outside that school, and 90 girls were killed. Can you tell us a little bit about that? How did that affect you? And what does this say about the dangers of the future?
It was a very tragic attack. It definitely took away so much of my hope. And I used to be more optimistic about the future because I saw that over the 20 years, especially where I was growing up, the control, I thought we had the control, the new generation. But when this attack and many others like this, when they happened, it took away a lot of my hope and definitely shattered hopes of many others. And yeah, we lost bright students who would be future leaders. So it was very tragic.
And do you think girls will continue to try to go to school in these difficult times?
Definitely. One thing that surprises a lot of people, and even myself, that regardless of how much the girls have been hurt in Afghanistan, not just girls, all the students, there were so many educational centers and schools that were attacked. But the next day you see all the classroom full, everyone is back. They've lost families, they've lost friends, classmates. Everyone is back because they see education as their only tool, and I hope that prevails.
Simin, you went to a well-known school called Marifat. And this was a school that started co-ed and then had to have separate buildings for girls and boys because of government diktat. But tell us how you think that school will survive in these difficult times. And also, both you, Simin, and Kamarnisa were talking about stress on minority Hazara community. So the Marifat School is also in a Hazara neighborhood. How does this increase the threat to girl students?
I think so. I just want to mention, restate what I said earlier, that I believe everyone in Afghanistan is, is targeted to be attacked. So there is no specific place or no specific person that we can say is in a higher risk. Maybe there are like some people because of the bright portfolio that they have, but the recent attacks have shown us that there's going to be attack anywhere on any people. So regardless of what they have done or what they are doing. So I think not only Marifat students, but a lot of other school are also going to be under threat, and specifically girls, because I mentioned earlier too that there is a chance that, as Hanifa mentioned too, that, for example, even if the Taliban might come, they would say, yes, girls can go to school, but they have to study until grade 6 or grade 10. And then after that, they can't. Or yes, girls can do certain jobs, but they are only limited to nursery, midwifery, or, for example, like teaching basic subjects and specifically like Islamic subjects to just like girls. So I think there is like a bigger threat for everyone in Afghanistan. So.
Right. And do you think that schools like Marifat will continue?
I mean, definitely. I mean, like as Kamar mentioned too, like that has been the story of all educational centers in Afghanistan, that one day something happens, the next day everyone is determined to go to school, because people have come to this understanding that we are not going to take guns. So our only ultimate option is working on our education. And I mean, like I really appreciate that, how it's painful because every day people are like losing a lot of lives, but at the same time, it's really encouraging to see that people have realized that the fact that their resilience in going to school, in becoming educated, can actually threaten the Taliban more than ever. And that's why they're like trying to increase their attacks just so they can take hopes of people.
Right. Now, Hanifa, tell us, what were your dreams when you managed to come to the United States to study? And what are your hopes for your future now?
So in a more condensed version, I want to use all the educational opportunities and freedom that I have here to help me grow as a person, as well as to help others. But even with education or any other kind of help and awareness, and I really want to go back in my country and to serve my people.
What would you like to do, assuming you can go back?
Well, I would like to work for women specifically and children. My major is education, so I would want to build more libraries, schools, and help women get educated.
Like the library you built. And just on that library, was that with the help of AgFaf?
That is another library that I built after going back my freshman year with the help of AgFaf, yes.
AgFaf being an American organization, which you will see on the list we'll put at the end, that has helped young Afghan women to study in the States and also to build libraries. Kamarnisa, what is your dream? You are working as a student researcher in one of the best Boston hospitals, Beth Israel Deaconess. Do you want to be a doctor? If things could work out and you can go back, what is your dream?
My dream is to improve the healthcare system in Afghanistan. That was always the ambition, and that drove me to come further and further. So right now I'm preparing for medical school, and one of the requirements is to have research experience, not only to go to medical school, but also eventually I want to become a physician scientist. So I want to do clinical medicine also and do research. Right now I'm at Harvard's teaching hospital, Beth Israel, and I work at the Department of Neonatology, which is newborn infants. And we conduct research on how nutrition, specifically fatty acids, omega-3 and omega-6, impact their immune cell population. So currently working on that research.
And Samin, what is your dream? I know you're working on distance learning, trying to develop a program, which would be a new thing. Talk about what you hope to do in the future.
I think if I want to talk just about for the next 2 years that I will be in Afghanistan before applying for graduate school, my hope is to help as many students as I can to learn English, and because I want them to go outside Afghanistan and get their education in better universities and schools outside Afghanistan, and they can have more opportunities with that to just envision a different future for themselves than the one that they might be in Afghanistan. But when with the aim of like trying to work on an online learning program, I'm trying to decrease the economic gap between students who come from different economic backgrounds, because not many students would be able to access a better education from distant places. But if we have an online system that people can access it from everywhere, regardless of their gender, their economic background, and their socio-cultural background, I think that can help a lot of students and a lot of people to envision a different future for themselves.
And I'm going to ask one more question to each of you, and I'll start with Samin and go around before we go to questions. Can you tell us what do you hope the American government and Americans who care about Afghanistan can do to help Afghan women and girls be able to continue their education in the difficult times ahead? Let me start with you, Samina, and we will go around.
I think something that the U.S. government can do is put more conditions and restrictions on the Taliban in terms of the deal that they are signing with each other and the future deal that's going to come out of the peace negotiation between the Afghan government and the Taliban. Other than that, ordinary American people, something that they could do is try to have in-person connections with Afghans who are either in Afghanistan or outside Afghanistan. I think on so many different levels, we are thankful to Americans who sent their troops in Afghanistan, and they also supported us financially so we can have so many opportunities, especially as girls. But I think it's also better that Americans get to know that their support has not gone to waste. I think right now there is this belief that everything that the US did for Afghanistan for the past 20 years, it wasn't worth it, and we should come out as soon as possible. But I think if conversations such as this continues and Americans get to know that there are so many women in Afghanistan, so many kids in Afghanistan who are getting education, who are going to jobs, who are trying to envision a different future for themselves, I think this changes their narratives about Afghans, and also it can help them to feel better about the support that they have done, so they can later on come up with other ways that they could support us individually.
Great, thank you. Hanifa, what do you hope the U.S. government will do to continue helping Afghan women and girls?
Adding to what Simin said, I would say provide educational opportunities for young Afghans, not only women, but all of them who want to continue their education abroad, and help them get out before it's too late.
Thank you. And Kamarnisa, what is your hope?
I hope that the U.S. and the NATO partners together ensure that human rights, minority rights, women's rights are not perished once the U.S. troops leave. The same thing as Simin said, we need commitment.
Commitment, yes. Thank you so much. We are going to turn now to the question period, and we will bring back Ambassador Crocker and James Miervaldis. I think Ambassador Crocker is temporarily missing. Now, James, I know you had a picture that you wanted to share. So whenever it is ready, I think we would like to see it. But while we are waiting, let me ask you this. Why was an airlift possible after Afghanistan? Do you know about this event? And, what made it feasible then that doesn't seem to be working now?
So Trudy, just historically talking about Vietnam, what we did for the Kurds, what we did for the Kosovars. So what we've been told by visa experts is that all happened before 9/11. And the U.S.'s own 9/11 immigration laws are what's hampering this. Politically, it sounds like a stretch to make an exemption 20 years later from laws that have kept the homeland safe, with the very, 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 very small chance that one bad actor could slip through. So it's a zero risk situation versus 46 years ago. Reading about this, where we moved over 100,000 Vietnamese Hmong out of Vietnam and Cambodia to Guam. The DoD did it. They did it and said they asked for forgiveness later. That's not the dynamic today.
If DoD were tasked, I have a question here. Could the Department of Defense do an airlift? I mean, are they capable? Do they have a plan, contingency plan?
And to be clear, Trudy, I have no inside knowledge of just the operations plans, but I take General McKenzie from CENTCOM's word, and he said we're about 7 weeks ago now at a Pentagon press briefing, if directed, CENTCOM can execute.
Now, I have another question about what is the major obstacle to more movement here. Now, you've mentioned bureaucracy and numbers of personnel and the security issue. But is one of the major obstacles that there's no specific channel for SIV visas? What do you advocate in that regard?
Yeah, so another point to this. In February, President Biden put out Executive Order 14013, which is a full review of the SIV process and also looking at what the future of this is. As we mentioned, our U.S. forces, our national security experts, diplomats, intelligence professionals will have to rely on interpreters well into the future. So this problem is not going away. We need to get an answer for the SIV process, and we obviously need it soon for Afghanistan. But there are many others out there. Representatives Crow and Waltz had a bill about Syrian refugees last year. Senator Warner also was looking into doing something very similar, but both bills didn't make it through the chambers. Even though we have Syrian allies that were embedded with our special operations forces. I don't know, Trudy. I don't know. It's a very frustrating process. Now, I think, and we will recommend, as noted, funding, resources. By the way, we've gotten dozens of veterans who have reached out to us saying, I'll process paper, I'll file, I'll help find employers, I'll find the right people to write letters of recommendation. How can I help? And right now, everyone's on the sidelines. We're waiting for a plan.
And just one last question to you before I turn back to the women. As a veteran, how would it make you feel to see many thousands left behind, knowing many will be killed?
That was bad. On a very personal note, so we're approaching the 20th anniversary of September 11th. I was a senior in high school in New Jersey. We lost 17 people from my hometown. I remember very vividly the whole horizon turning black. I remember all the confusion, the fear of that day, because you could see the Twin Towers on a very clear day, but not that day. The whole horizon was a very dark cloud, and the phone lines were down. I can only imagine the fear these families, these women overseas in Afghanistan are feeling now. It must be very similar. This is probably their 9/11.
Yeah, I have more questions for you, but I want to ask some to our other panelists. I have a question for all of you. How did you manage to get to the United States to study? So maybe I can just run through briefly and just tell me. So let me start with Kamarnisa.
I came here in my sophomore year of high school with the help of Afghan Girls Financial Assistance Fund, AGFAF. So I applied to the school myself, but they helped me with their connection and network. So I was able to secure a full scholarship at St. Margaret's School in Virginia.
And then how did you get to university in the States?
University, again, ACFAF continued to help, and I myself did all the application and fulfilled the requirements, academic requirements, and I got accepted at Wagner College in New York City, and I majored in medical anthropology and did pre-med.
That's great. And Hanifa, how did you do it?
So the process is very similar to kids in here in the US. But when I was in high school, I was managing my sister's library and got involved with many educational programs that largely shaped my goals of studying in the US. Then with the help of Joe Highland, my mentor from ACFAF, I was able to start the application process and work on my TOEFL and other requirements for school. And I got in. Whoa.
And Samin, what about you?
Yeah, so I first came to the US for a summer program with Yale Young Global Scholars Program. They had sent 5 scholarships to our school, Marifat, and 5 students from the entire school would get accepted after passing some exams. When I came for that summer program, I also started applying for a private school individually, and I got accepted. So I did my junior year and senior year of high school in that school. And when I was a senior, I started applying for colleges too. Once I was accepted to Smith, then I became a member of ACFAF, and ACFAF also supported me financially throughout my college career.
That's great. And I understand that Ambassador Crocker is now ready to get back in after some computer glitches. So I want to welcome him back. And Ambassador Crocker, we spent years giving hope to people in Afghanistan. What is the message we send to them and to future allies if we don't rescue those who helped us?
It is a devastating message we are sending. Basically, you can't count on us. We've just heard from 3 amazing, accomplished, and courageous Afghan women. That's the future of this country. And we used to understand that. President Biden used to understand that. In January 2002, I had just reopened the embassy. My first congressional visitor then was chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Senator Joe Biden. I took him to a first grade girls' school in Kabul. These kids ranged in age from 6 to 12. The 12-year-olds had not had the chance for any education. But they were getting it now because we saw that as a strategic priority for long-term societal change. I find it all the more incomprehensible that having been there at the beginning, that President Biden can now simply turn his back on those who we helped and on those that he personally had intervened to help as chairman.
Can you imagine any reason why there is no direction coming from the White House to State Department and Defense Department to do what is necessary?
The priority of the president obviously was to get us, not just our military, to get the U.S. out of Afghanistan. That the signal he is sending is that as president, he does not want to think about Afghanistan. Pull the troops out, close the book, and get on with other issues. Given that mindset, and given his order that way, so sadly, the future is now. I don't see any way of turning this ship prior to the full withdrawal of U.S. troops. And once we've done that, once we are no longer on the ground in any form or shape, all agency lies with the Taliban. They will do what they want to do. We are not going to be able to influence it.
So you think the moment is now, and do you think that there is still enough time for some major pressure campaign on the White House for some kind of movement?
Yes. Listen, the effort that was made by the surging of 50 new personnel into the embassy in Kabul, that came about because of relentless pushing and persuading and lobbying that James did as CEO of No One Left Behind. So certainly these pressures need to continue. The administration that has made such an issue about human rights globally is forced to confront that they are contributing to a horrific denial of human rights through violence against those who serve with us, the interpreters, and against half of the Afghan population, the girls and women that we pledged to help. We are now tearing up that. Time for us to go home. So for an administration that talks about human rights, I hope we can keep the pressure up to say that when they walk away from Afghanistan, they are part of a betrayal of human rights.
Thank you. I think that is the right note to end on. I want to thank everyone for watching this event, and thanks to the participants. And if you feel that America has a moral obligation to help Afghan translators and to keep in touch person to person with organizations, civil society and women's organizations in Afghanistan, then please contact your legislators and tell them. Many lives are at stake. There will be a list of organizations at the end after our participants leave the screen, and you can check that list. And the program remains available for viewing with the list at inquirer.com/Trudy Rubin Live, one word. So please recommend it to your friends. This will be the last Inquirer Live with Trudy Rubin event until fall. So have a good summer. And I will say from my heart, please keep thinking about everything that you heard on this program. Goodbye for now, and thank you all.
Thank you.